So I'm gonna start right here on this side with the controlled wash. So a controlled wash is something where you control where you want the color to go. And so if you remember with this one here that we did yesterday, this is not controlled because there was so much bleeding going on, and the water was running into places because the pigment was running into the places where the water was pulling it, you know. And so this would not be considered a controlled wash. So a controlled wash is something where you control where you want it to go. The background is dry, so we don't start with a wet background. We take some fresh water and add that to our brush, and then we just take a color. It doesn't really matter. So since I used blues and greens yesterday, I don't know, let's go with orange. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is load my paintbrush is saturated with water. I'm loading it with lots and lots of color. I'm getting a bunch on there. Okay, and a controlled wash is something that we control where we want it to go. So what I'm gonna do is just think of something that I want to paint. I don't know, I'm just thinking this might turn into a tree, I don't know. But do you see how I'm controlling exactly where I want it to go? It's not bleeding anywhere else but in here. Okay, completely controlled. Rinse out my brush, and I'm dipping it into brown right now. And so then I'm going to make a trunk for this tree. Might be a tree, I don't know what it's going to turn out to be like. And then I'll rinse out my brush again, and then I'll just add like a little bit of yellowish green. And then I'm just going to kind of add a little bit inside of those areas. But that's how you do a controlled wash. Okay, controlling where you want it to be. I could do something like this, where in the background I've got maybe some mountains going on. Got some mountains back in there. Something like that, so that it looks like a little scenery. Okay, and then go in and add a little bit darker in here for our tree. So that's, you know, kind of what that would be. Probably not the best tree in the world, but it's controlled. I'm gonna go in and add some colors and do some bleeding in here, which this is not, in the middle here is not controlled. But the idea is the outside edges of these lines are all controlled because there's no bleeding going on. Okay, so that's the first technique. The next technique is called wet on wet, and that is actually what you did. That is what you did the other day. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to block out an area, a squared area, and I'm going to make sure, remember how you tilt your paper to make sure that the light shines on it and you can see where all the water's going. Don't put any water in areas that you don't want it to be in. Like that. Wet on wet means wet paper, wet paintbrush. Okay? Wet paper, wet paintbrush. So I start with, I'll do red. I didn't do red the other day, right? So we'll do red, wet on wet. Cool stuff happens, right? Cool blending and bleeding happens with wet on wet. I don't know, let's try purple. Purple might be cool. So I might just add some purple in there and see what happens. Just play with it and see what cool stuff. You played a lot the other day and probably got some cool effects, but I love doing this wet on wet technique with landscapes because you can create some really cool effects back there, like bushes or distant trees, or you can even do it with in water. It's beautiful in water, like Claude Monet, Lily Pond type of water. Or you can even do it, I'm thinking here, what am I thinking of? You can even do it in clouds. It's beautiful in clouds. So I'm just adding a tiny bit of like darker, a little bit darker in there. Okay, there we go. So that's kind of pretty. That's wet on wet. Rinsing my brush out again. Okay, so a variegated wash. A lot of artists use it. It's kind of like a wet on wet, but a little bit different. But a lot of artists use it when they want to create muddied colors. Not really muddied colors, but maybe like mixing and blending bushes in the distance or something like that. So you would just start off with a dry background. My brush is loaded with that red since I already had it on there. And then I'm gonna just start with red on this side, okay? Red on this side. And then I'm gonna pick a color that's gonna bleed into the red. So I'm rinsing my brush out real quick in the water. Just rinse it out real quick in the water. And then a color that it's gonna bleed into. So I was thinking maybe yellow. So I'm gonna do yellow over here, okay? And then slowly these colors are gonna meet. So I'm gonna take that yellow, I'm gonna drag it into the red, and they're gonna kind of meet. And then I can take a little bit more red and kind of do a color blending mixing. So variegated that's what that means. It's they're mixing. It's like you're weaving two colors together. So and you know, color theory, yellow and red makes orange. That's what we learned in primary school, right? Yellow and red makes orange. So you've got that color there. And then some artists will take, you know, if they're doing a background and they just want another color or shade, they'll just take other colors and kind of blend them and mix them in there. Kind of like that. Okay, so there's your variegated. So we've got our control wash, our wet on wet, and our variegated. And the next one is a dry brush. So since I've been using this brush, it's wet. I can't use it. I have to find a dry brush. So I'm gonna go, I just grabbed this one. This one's kind of cool. I'll grab this one, and the dry brush means that the brush is dry, but also the paper has to be dry too, okay? So let's say I'm making, what I'm gonna do, just watch and see what I'm doing. I'm just taking this brush and I am just putting a little bit of green on the end of it, and then I'm just spreading it out a little bit like that, okay? Let's say I'm making a landscape and I'm doing grass or something like that. Then I can use this dry brush technique to, maybe I'll just pick it up so that you can see this, to make little strokes of grass, like little blades of grass. Let me get some more green on there. Just tiny little blades of grass. You see that? It's very controlled. You know, you can definitely control it, but adding those little blades of grass would be cool. I could see doing like a blue sky back in here or something. Let it dry, come in the next day, and you could do this dry brush on top. There are other brushes over there. I'm gonna grab one real quick. There are other brushes. This is a hog hair brush. I think there are other ones that might work a little bit better, so I'm gonna just try this one real quick and see if it's better. So you might experiment when you do yours. Oh yeah, this one's better. See that? I would experiment, and I'm just like flicking upwards like this for the dry brush. Dry brush can also be used on an area like if this right here, if you wanted to add bark on this tree, you could dry brush it later after it was dry the second day. That might be kind of cool. Okay, so I like dry brush quite a bit. You can use that for all of your like finish up details. So that's a good one. So we've got salt, saran wrap, waxing out, and splatter next.